Good evening and welcome back to ParaGhoul Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark. If you're new here, this radio show and podcast dives deep into the shadows of Saskatchewan's past to learn what lies within. Sometimes we even go to other locations across Canada to chat about dark history, mysteries, urban legends, and we sometimes even get into some monsters. I'm your host, K.D. Kulpa. I'm a horror author and paranormal researcher in Regina, Saskatchewan. I love digging into the past to bring life to ghosts and monsters hiding in the dark. And I especially love going live every week with you to tell you what I've uncovered. Tonight we're digging into the paranormal cases that have been gaining popularity in Ontario. And specifically, we're talking about the Mill of Kintail. So turn down the lights and curl into a blanket as we talk about the history and paranormal evidence collected from Almonte, Ontario. Although we could continue talking about the gadgets that paranormal investigators use or the history of the paranormal field, I thought tonight we could do something a little different and instead focus on an active location that is being investigated to this day on a regular basis. With the increase in paranormal attractions and markets, such as the chance to stay overnight in a haunted hotel or to be a paranormal investigator for the night, why not talk about one of these attractions that you can go out and investigate for yourself? So for our final episode on digging into paranormal history and cases, for season 1 anyway, let's instead talk about one of Canada's haunted locations that you can visit, the Mill of Kintail. So the Mill of Kintail Conservation Area is 152 acres in size and is a preserved area operated by the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority in Mississippi Mill, Ontario. Now, the Mill of Kintail itself is apparently approximately 45 minutes southwest of Ottawa, if that helps you kind of understand where we are in Canada. Now, unfortunately, I have never been to this area. I have been to Ottawa briefly I can't remember what it was for, but unfortunately at that time, I didn't know about, ghosts being 45 minutes away. But I can assure you that this place is now on my haunted bucket list, which seems to be getting longer with every episode that we do. From the pictures of the location, I can definitely understand why the last person to actually, own it and use it as a place to live, turned it into a summer home for him and his wife. Now, what did they turn into their summer home? Let's talk a little bit, about the actual history. On the preserve is an 1830s mill that was built by a man named John Baird. So Baird was a Scottish immigrant that came to the area of Almonte, Ontario to settle back in the 1820s, 1830s. Although I couldn't find any original text, it said that Baird built the grist mill, a general store, and a homestead in the area. Once all were built, his family quickly joined him, but wouldn't keep the land for long. By the early 1860s, Baird would actually lose the property over legal disputes with his neighbors, leading to the mill to be abandoned. Now, I couldn't find an actual cause or date for his death, but it said that Baird had quickly become unpopular within the community and died shortly after he lost the rights to his land. So the land would then remain abandoned for many years, until a man named Robert Tate Mackenzie, who was a physician, a sculptor, and apparently a great educator, and Robert had returned to Almonte for a celebration of the town. The story goes that while he was there, he realized how much he loved the area around the old mill, a place that he had visited and played around when he was young. And this led to him to persuading the owner of the land at that time to let him purchase it so that he could take it over as his and his wife's summer home in the 1930s, as well as his studio. He wanted it, like I said, he was a sculptor and he wanted to have it as his studio. Again, if you see the area, you'd understand why he would do this. It's quite beautiful. Now, unfortunately for Mackenzie, he wouldn't be able to enjoy it for long. On April 29th, 1938, so 8 years later, the following article was printed in the Windsor Daily Star, which was quoting a Philadelphia report. So apparently he lived in Philadelphia in the wintertime and came up to Canada in the summer. So this is what the article states. Dr. Robert Tate Mackenzie, distinguished Canadian-born sculptor and physician, died suddenly at his home here yesterday. He was 70. Remember, this was in Philadelphia. The article goes on to say, Dr. Mackenzie was for many years the director of physical education at the University of Pennsylvania. He had been in apparently good health and planned a dinner with his wife. As he walked from his study, he collapsed. A physician said death was caused by a heart ailment. Dr. Mackenzie achieved distinction in 2 separate fields. In his career in medicine and physical training, he rose to the high office in the University of Pennsylvania after being medical director of physical training in McGill University, Montreal for more than 30 years ago. In sculpture, he produced in stone and bronze the figures of heroes and athletes. He executed the memorial to commemorate 60 years of Confederation, which stands in the House of Commons at Ottawa. Now, the property, so the mill itself, would be kept by Ethel as a summer residence, just, as they wanted it to be, after her husband's passing. Given the years of the mill's abandonment, this also meant that it underwent, probably some major renovations, I would assume, to preserve it back to its glory. Now, I did find one statement that the renovations were actually finished within a year of him buying the home. So the renovations were done in 1931, which seems really fast. So maybe it wasn't as bad as, you'd think. But eventually, Ethel would sell the property in 1952 to Major James Lays, who would turn it into a museum celebrating the life and works of Robert Tate Mackenzie. So because it was his studio and because they owned it for so long, obviously they would have had a lot of his sculptures and a lot of his work, including probably work that he never finished, in the building. So they decided to turn it into a museum for him. Now, the mill is used to house not only the sculptures of Mackenzie's and celebrating his history, but it also honors his close friend that he grew up with in the area, which was Dr. James Naismith. So if you are a sports history fan, you might actually know the name already. But if you don't, Dr. James Naismith is known for inventing basketball. Apparently, you will even find a room in the museum dedicated to Ethel, as she was a poet as well. So now, if you look up images of the area, like I said, you'll understand why Mackenzie wanted this specific mill for his studio and summer home. Not only was it a big building, so probably made it quite easy to create a nice big studio, but it's surrounded by trees. It's near the Indian River, which is right kind of in front of the mill. And it's just a beautiful landscape. In an article from 1982 in the Ottawa Citizen, this was said about what has happened to the area more recently. So since purchasing the site in 1972, the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority has continued to expand the museum collection and develop the grounds as a nature preserve. Today, the Mill of Kintail is a multifaceted tourist and educational facility. Nature trails wind along the banks of the Indian River. Shaded groves offer picnic areas. The chapel is available for weddings and special services. And tea is available twice weekly during July and August. Now remember, this was the 1980s. I don't know if they have all of this still to this day, but it gives you kind of an idea of how they decided they wanted to change the area now that no one was actually using it as a home. Now, before we talk more about what you can actually find at the Mill of Kintail today, let's first talk about the evidence that's been collected. And, what has led to the claim that the mill is a very haunted and very active location that paranormal enthusiasts should visit. So although there are likely other investigators that may have visited this building over the years, The main evidence that I was able to find about this particular location comes from an Ottawa-based paranormal group called the Phantoms of Yore. From what I could tell in the information they share online, this group has been investigating the Mill of Kintail for quite a few years already. Some of the earliest accounts of investigations that I personally looked up were from, 2020, 2019, and even earlier. Apparently, they found the buildings to be very active, leading them to even start doing public investigations, which continue to this day. So as I said, this public investigations essentially means that you can pay to become a paranormal investigator for the night, as they lead you through not only the Mill of Kintail, but in some of their tours, they also include the gatehouse, which was originally in the same location. I don't think it's the same building, but it's the same location as the general store that John Baird built to support his family before the land was taken away from them. So when you go through the evidence that this particular paranormal group has been collecting over the years, which you can also, by the way, watch on their YouTube channel if you're interested, you will see that there's a lot of, the typical haunting kind of activity on a day-to-day basis. Apparently, it isn't uncommon for the staff of the museum to have lights go on and off on their own, including even motion sensor lights. They said there was one account that I read that even when the motion sensor lights are taped over, so to prevent any motion being detected, the lights can still turn on their own. And the staff has said that the lights turn off and on throughout the entire museum, even on different circuits, leading them to believe it is actually ghosts or something, unseen actively making themselves known, and not just some unusual electrical activity in one of the lines. Other activity that the staff are said to have experienced on a regular occurrence are doors opening and closing, and sometimes even locking themselves, and furniture moving at night. Apparently, on more than one occasion, a camera has been set up in various areas of the museum, even overnight, to see what it is captured. And frequently, things like lights going off and on in the building, even when it's empty and it's the middle of the night, or motion sensors are triggered, it's just not an uncommon thing to find on cameras in the building when there's no one there. As mentioned earlier, one of the rooms in the museum is dedicated to Mackenzie's wife, Ethel. So apparently she was a poet and enjoyed the summer house while alive, before she sold it. Her dedicated room is one of the most active within the museum itself, according to this paranormal group. And even when not doing paranormal investigations, the staff have found that furniture gets moved inside of the room overnight. Including there's a piano in the room, apparently, and they have found that the piano bench gets pulled out overnight when no one has been in the building and they don't know who has pulled it out. And during investigations by the Phantoms of Yore specifically, they've also captured evidence of objects moving. Apparently, on one occurrence, they used one of those small balls, which is funny because we talked about some of these items that are now used in investigations and how they are cat toys. And I think that's what they're talking about here, is one of those small balls that when they're touched or moved, it will light up. So it's like a cat toy or something. But anyway, they had one of these in the investigation, and they actually had captured it rolling across the floor by itself. And so as the paranormal team tried to debunk what happened, seeing if they could make the movement happen without any force, without them physically touching it, they realized that the ball had actually rolled against the slope of the floor, so went uphill kind of idea, towards the small shrine that has been created for Ethel. So of course this has led them to believe that the ball's movement, which would have required force by something, could have been Ethel letting them know she was there. Now, apparently, they also have a computer in that room as well that plays a video. I'm assuming this is likely related to the history of Ethel. If, you've been into museums and they tend to have computer screens or some sort of historical video playing in the background of certain rooms. I'm assuming that's what kind of computer we're talking about here. But staff have seen the computer turn off and on by itself, and actually many times, multiple times in a row even. So given the evidence seems to center on this room in particular, Although, from what I can tell, it occurs all throughout the building. But this Ethel's room is a particularly active room. It is expected that the ghost is potentially that of Ethel, but we'll get more into that here in a minute. Or it could be at least one of the ghosts. It has been said that whoever does haunt the mill itself has never felt angry or negative. Instead, it seems to have a calming and positive presence. The same can't be said of the gatehouse, or where the storefront that John Baird had built would have been. That building is said to hold something more negative and heavy. When the team has conducted investigations in that building, they feel drawn to the second floor, where negative energies seem to be present. So in this building, in the gatehouse, investigators and guests have been touched, noticed temperature changes, and just an overall different energy compared to the mill, leading the investigative team to believe that it's haunted by a different ghost entirely. Apparently, EVPs have also been captured in the gatehouse, including messages to get out and leave the building. The same angry, deep voice has been captured on numerous occasions, but its intentions are not clear to the investigative team. Apparently, the team has even tried a Ouija board in the room on multiple occasions with different people present to see, if they'd get the same messages. They didn't say on their website exactly how these Ouija board sessions were conducted or, what kind of evidence they might have collected, but apparently they found it interesting that the same name and number came up on 2 occasions on the Ouija board with different people involved. So that makes them think that maybe, if they do more digging into that name and number, they might be able to get a guess as to who might be haunting the building. Now, we talked about the Ouija board in a previous episode, including the idea that scientists believe it is simply our subconscious trying to give us messages through our fingers and not some ghostly presence. But you also might remember is that after researching the science behind Ouija boards, they're still something I refuse to use. I'm sorry. Until we have the ability to measure what is beyond the veil sort of thing, or understand those energies that we can feel but can't see, I just don't feel comfortable taking the gamble with, portals and opening doors if that is actually what these things can do. But that's just my personal opinion, as obviously many paranormal teams still use them in investigations, regardless of what the science might say about them. So I'll leave that one to you, what you think about that particular piece of evidence. As I mentioned earlier, the team does have some of their evidence captured in videos on their YouTube channel if you ever want to check it out for yourself. You just need to look up the Mill of Kintail Paranormal Investigation, and I'm sure you will find them quickly. But what about the ghosts? Who do they think is actually haunting the buildings? Whether it's the more positive energy that we find in the mill versus the more negative one in the gatehouse. As we previously talked about, one of the main ghosts of the mill is thought to be that of Ethel Mackenzie. Especially given the high activity that is in the room dedicated to her, many feel that she has a warm, welcoming presence that is just in the building, and they don't feel at all threatened by her. Others wonder if Robert even pops into the mill to visit his summer home, the one that he purchased because of the memories that it brought up for him, about his childhood and his friendship with Dr. James Naismith. I haven't seen any kind of mention of James Naismith as potentially being one of the ghosts, so I'm assuming that means they don't think he is. But some of the noises in the museum that apparently can be heard are said to sound similar to what it may have sounded like when Mackenzie was working in his studio on his sculptures. And it does kind of make you wonder, because Ethel continued using the home for so many years after Robert's death. Maybe he liked going back there because he could still see his wife as well as be a part of his childhood and where he set up his studio. So maybe Robert comes and checks it out. Even Ethel's piano, which we talked about before, how the piano bench has been found to be moved. Apparently, you can also sometimes hear it being played in the museum, which makes them, again, feel that it's probably Ethel who would play that piano on a regular basis. Now, apparently, whoever the ghost of the mill is, or maybe it's ghosts for that matter, they are not threatening. Instead, they tend to be just nosy and want to know what's going on around the building, apparently, especially during things like renovations or changes to the building. It has also been said that seances were held in the building on multiple occasions, leading some to wonder if the seances brought in ghosts from other locations, making it hard to know for sure who might be haunting the building. Although, to be honest, personally, this reminds me of the government house here in Regina. If you remember, we talked about the potential ghosts of the building, and I mentioned that, there's probably some likelihood that some of the ghosts could have come with the many artifacts and historical furniture that were brought and donated to the museum when they opened. Because it sounds like Mackenzie and maybe even the later owners had tried to keep that pioneer feel to the building, filling it with furniture and items from that time, kind of leading me to wonder if that could also be the cause for some of the hauntings, old items that just have something attached. There seems to be a lot of evidence that that can happen, so it's a possibility, and that's why they can't figure out for sure who the ghosts are. Although given the number of sculptures and things that Mackenzie himself created, all under, the same room in an area of Canada that he loved and grew up in, it wouldn't surprise me if it is Mackenzie himself visiting the museum on a regular basis. But what about the gatehouse? Given that it's a more negative energy, and given the history of the building, it sounds like they believe the hauntings to be caused by John Baird himself. Since he was forced off the land and forced out of his livelihood when he lost the mill and the store, which provided, an income for his family, it wouldn't be surprising if there was some anger and resentment, kind of in the very structure of the area. But apparently that's not the only spirits that frequent the area. There has even been evidence of a child in the museum, which they can't explain. And I'm sorry, as soon as they said child, it made me think of Ghost Adventures, talking about how, supposedly demons can mimic children and all of that. But as far as the paranormal investigators can tell, as well as the staff, and from the initial research I've done myself, there's no evidence of children in the mill itself. And it sounds like the investigators and the staff don't feel that it is an evil presence either, but they do hear a child's voice and laughter, which has also been captured by EVPs. And this particular ghost seems to love the light-up balls that we talked about, so those cat toys, as well, often playing with them and bouncing them during investigations, and it's just a more playful, youthful kind of energy. So although they don't think the child was part of the mill's history specifically, they do wonder if it could have something to do, with the river nearby or the forest nearby, like if something had happened in the area and this child's ghost is simply drawn to the museum. So it's entirely possible that accidental death could have happened in, the water or in the nearby forest, if this was a place that even Mackenzie himself talked about, being an area that him and his friend played when they were young. So obviously children were drawn to the area over the years, so it's entirely possible that something had happened. I didn't dig into it extensively. I would have to go digging for a lot longer, but who knows? And remember that there was a long period of time that the mill was abandoned and falling into disrepair. So maybe even those kinds of accidents could have happened during its abandonment. We don't know. Whatever the cause, both staff and the team of Phantoms of Yore firmly believe that the child spirit is exactly that, just a child looking to play and have fun, and nothing sinister. But what do you think? Personally, I think I have yet another haunted location on my bucket list. That's just what it comes down to, right? Yet another place in Canada that I want to go visit for myself, and maybe even try and get some, get some evidence for myself. So maybe I could even get involved in one of the public investigations to get a nighttime walk through the buildings and see if I could meet the ghosts for myself. Although, not if they decide to pull out a Ouija board. If they pull out a Ouija board, I am leaving the building, sorry to say, because I'm not going to be involved in that. As I said, nowadays you can still visit the museum even if you don't want to go during the paranormal investigations. According to their website, they open up sometime in the spring to early summer, and then they remain open until sometime in October. And there are hiking trails, or I guess snowshoe trails, if you want to go visit during the winter months and not go into the mill. but that, those trails will take you through the conservation area and right by the mill. There's also a playground and a basketball court and, like I said, picnic areas. I didn't see anything about a chapel anymore, but maybe they still have that for certain special occasions. I'm not sure. And as I mentioned, they are still holding public paranormal investigations as well to raise money for the authority. When I was on their website, I saw that they already have the dates for 2025 up on their website that you can buy tickets for. Hopefully I get to go to Ontario someday before they stop doing the tours, as I'd love to check that out myself. But thank you for joining us tonight. Did you know I have a weekly newsletter that includes a link to the latest episode of ParaGhoul Paranormal? Subscribers also receive updates about upcoming events, behind-the-scenes information, and subscriber-only updates on upcoming book releases, book signings, and more. If you're interested, head over to my website at kdkulpa.com to sign up. Next week, we will be returning to the Canadian Legends and Monsters theme for, the last one of the season, where we will be talking about the Great Amherst Mystery. It seemed fitting, given that this particular mystery follows a supposed series of poltergeist activity that a man named Walter Hubble claimed happened to him while living in a house in Amherst, Nova Scotia. I don't know. I'm a little worried that we're going to have even more put on my bucket list after next week. Many skeptics believe that the claims were a hoax, but we will dig into the mystery so that you can decide for yourselves. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, where we'll uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and delve deeper into the shadows. Until then, remember to keep your flashlight handy and digital recorders ready. This is Katie Kulpa signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.